As a man who supports Manchester City, I would find it sacrilege nowadays for anyone to cross the divide from east to west Manchester and sign for the club's bitter rivals, Manchester United, so I can only imagine how United fans felt when Carlos Tevez moved to Manchester City in 2009 after spending 2 seasons at Old Trafford. Billy Meredith, the subject of today's video, did exactly that in 1906, so in theory, I should probably despise him, even though of course I wasn't around to see this transfer take place. But in reality, his story can only be admired by all followers of the game, irrespective of allegiances. Plus he moved back to Man City later on in his career, but we'll get to that in a bit. Meredith was well and truly one of a kind, a maverick on the pitch who dedicated long hours to his craft in a time when that was considered abnormal, as well as a true innovator off the pitch who changed the face of British football forever. In this video, I'm going to tell his story in another one of my Player in Focus documentaries, and for those of you who are new to the channel, I have already covered the likes of Jimmy Hogan, Steve Bloomer, Bert Troutman and Lee Roos, so if you want to check those videos out, they're all on my channel somewhere for you to watch. But before you do watch them, let's get into the story of Billy Meredith, the original Welsh wizard. Meredith was born in 1874 in Chirk, a town in North Wales which is almost located right on the border with England, into a family with 9 other siblings, of whom he was the youngest. His parents were both primitive Methodists and his father was a miner, and it looked as though Meredith would follow in his father's footsteps when, at the age of 12, he dropped out of school and became a pit pony driver. This move was intervened by one of his teachers by the name of Thomas E. Thomas, who would later go on to become the president of the Welsh FA, who convinced Meredith to keep up his sporting talent as much as possible. Thomas worked with Meredith thoroughly, even going so far as to place pennies on the ground during crossing practice as targets for Meredith to hit, and should he be on the money, pun definitely intended, he would keep the penny all for himself. However, it wasn't just Meredith who would later go on to achieve national recognition as a result of Thomas's guidance, as no fewer than 13 future Welsh internationals would play for Thomas at Chirk's local team, who lifted 5 out of 8 Welsh Cups from 1887 until 1894, which is more than any other team in the competition's history, barring just 8. Meredith would only play in the 1893 and 1894 finals for Chirk, but his star was already shining brightly, and perhaps inarguably, he was the greatest out of all of those 13 players. During the 1893-94 season, he would turn out for Northwich Victoria of the English 2nd Division, who didn't pay him much but offered to cover his expenses, although it wouldn't turn out to be a productive season for Northwich, as they finished in last and were forced to resign from the Football League that very season owing to financial problems. In a game for them, he caught the eye of a referee who also just so happened to be an official at Ardwick FC, which does seem a little bit suspicious if you ask me, but he reported his talent to the club and Meredith signed for them in the summer of 1894, the year that Ardwick changed its name to Manchester City. His parents were extremely skeptical of the move, since they wanted their son to play football for the joy of it and not for the money, and apparently they didn't pay too much attention to Billy's subsequent career, even when he became famous and widely celebrated. Meredith originally signed as an amateur, continuing to work in the mines in order to earn money and commuting from Chirk to games when needed, but in January 1895, under pressure from City, he signed professional terms, abandoning his dream of becoming an engineer in the process. Even with this, he believed that footballers needed to have a job alongside the sport they were playing in order to raise enough funds to live, bearing in mind of course that a footballer's career is, and was even more so back then, an extremely finite thing which could be ended in the blink of an eye as a result of one accident or mistimed tackle, and it would mean that they could move into the other profession permanently and at ease once their playing days are concluded. He did also state that money should mean everything to the professional footballer, irrespective of how enthusiastic they were for the sport, and those 2 beliefs would serve him both well and poorly over the course of his extremely long career. He quickly established himself as a key figure in City's team, scoring the club's first 2 goals in a league match against Manchester United, by then called Newton Heath, although City did lose 5-2 in that game. By the next season, still aged only 21 at this point, he had assumed the club's captaincy and become their best paid player, and his attraction meant that City were one of the most attended teams in the entire country, recording averages of between 15,000 and 19,000 spectators attending games frequently. However, the club were going nowhere despite their talent and lavish spending on player wages, as the team struggled to gel as a result of the constant upheaval of players, even going through as many as 13 different outside lefts between 1894 and 1899 in attempts to find Meredith's opposite number. Finally, they would achieve promotion to the First Division for the first time in their history in 1899, with Meredith, who had scored 46 goals for City in all competitions by that point, netting a ridiculous 29 in 33 league games from the wing that season to propel City to the Second Division title. Things would get tougher for them in the First Division, as although Meredith continued to sparkle frequently whenever he had defenders put on him in numbers, he couldn't quite have the influence on the game that he wanted and the club needed, and by 1902, City had been relegated. With this came a change in policy, as they attempted to rebuild in a way that meant Meredith, while still remaining pivotal, wasn't the sole player through whom the play would go, and it worked, as they bounced back immediately by becoming Second Division champions in 1903. The next season, City came in second place in the First Division and would reach their first ever FA Cup final, with crowds packing in to see the Welsh Wizards in full flight, and Meredith did not disappoint. He scored the winning goal against Bolton to give City the first major trophy in their history, although Bolton maintained that Meredith was offside just before netting the decisive goal, but as footage, as far as I could tell, doesn't exist for this game, we'll never truly know. At this point, I think it would be important to explain why the crowds were so drawn to Meredith and his star appeal, as well as who he was as a player, just to give you a little bit of context as to how he operated. Meredith was primarily an outside right, which would be more commonly referred to nowadays as a right winger, and he had phenomenal wing play ability which set him apart from many of his contemporaries. He was pacey, direct, tricky on the ball, and blessed with a two-footedness that allowed him to shoot accurately or deliver a teasing ball into the box on either foot. Whenever he was on the ball, he would primarily stay close to the touchline, but sometimes he would even go past it, only keeping the ball in play by kicking it lightly with his toes and nothing more. One of his trademark moves was to head to the corner flag and proceed to send in a high cross aimed in between the penalty spot and the 6-yard area line, which was undoubtedly where his crossing practice with Mr. Thomas as a youngster came in extremely handy, and he was quoted as saying that if a winger put in 6 accurate crosses per game, then his game was successful. The common thing to do at the time was almost the exact opposite of what Meredith was doing, as wingers were instructed to put in a low ball into the box and do it as early as possible, but after World War I, crosses would then be told to be sent in high and onto the striker's head, something which Meredith had been doing for a very long time. His build was lean and almost gangly, but he used that to his advantage by jinking around defenders with consummate ease, wowing the spectators with how easily he was able to manipulate the play when he was on the ball, something which he noted was important to showing the quality of a particular player. He would chew on a toothpick regularly whilst playing, which replaced chewing tobacco, as the club didn't like the fact that it meant that saliva would get on his shirt, and he would spend long hours improving his craft, even scheduling extra training sessions and fitness regimes in order to keep him as in shape as possible, at a time when that was pretty much considered as stupid, and considering his non-existent injury record and his career's longevity, it clearly worked. Like his family, Meredith was a teetotaler, something which did put him at odds with City's almost inherent drinking culture at the time, although it is said that the club made him room with their striker William Gillespie, who was an alcoholic, on away days, in order for Meredith to keep Gillespie in check and prevent him from turning up to games drunk, as he had a tendency to do. His frequent chats to the spectators whenever the play was on the other side of the pitch, as well as his appearances in music halls, songs and other major events, led him to live a celebrity lifestyle off the pitch as well, although his abstinence from alcohol was maintained throughout, and as a fellow teetotaler, I salute him. All of these factors meant that he was described by some observers at the time as Britain's first ever footballing superstar, a reputation that was rubber-stamped with his winning goal in the 1904 FA Cup final, at a time when the Cup was more prestigious to win than the league. He did have a short temper though, expressing his desire to continuously kick things, be it footballs or even people, if of course a football wasn't around to be kicked, and constantly expressing his disgust at how training sessions were being run and the general governance of the sport by the authorities. Just when it seemed it was all going well for the Welshman, however, his City career would spectacularly come caving in on itself at the end of the 1904-1905 season. City were chasing the league title, level on points with Newcastle at the top of the table but with an inferior goal average, and for their last game of the season they would play against 4th place side Aston Villa. Meredith allegedly approached Villa's captain Alec Leek prior to the match and offered him to pay him £10 in order to throw the game in City's favour, which Leek immediately refused. In a robust game that saw heavy challenges come in on Leek, as well as various unsporting gestures aimed in his direction and a full-on fight between both sets of players, Villa would end up winning the game 3-2, and the Blues missed out on the league title by 2 points as a result of Newcastle's victory in their final game. In the immediate aftermath of the game, Leek would report Meredith to the FA, and he was suspended for 18 months on account of attempting to throw a game, an accusation that he always fervently denied. Meredith was suspended from being paid for the duration of his ban, but during that time, he would essentially become a whistleblower against the club who was still employing him, alleging that they hadn't been adhering to the FA's strict £4 per week maximum wage policy, with many of their players, including himself, supposedly earning as much as £7 or £8 a week, and that if he were to have carried out the attempted bribery, it would have been on the orders of his manager, Tom Maley. This led the FA to conduct their second investigation into the club in as many years, but whilst the first one was minor and didn't result in anything serious being uncovered, this search was much more thorough and discovered that Meredith's allegations were correct. When this came to light, City were fined £900 and saw 17 of their players banned for a certain period of time, and their manager Maley was suspended for life, although it could very well have resulted in the end of the club completely had the FA taken an even more stringent view on proceedings. This led City to be stuck in financial strife, with players needing to be sold in order to raise funds, and in 1906, 4 of their players were transferred to Manchester United, including Meredith, who of course was still suspended at this point. United offered to pay the £100 fine and the £500 signing on fee that was required to purchase Meredith from City, and he made his debut for the ambitious Reds on New Year's Day against, pertinently enough, Aston Villa. Within a year, Meredith had become the key man at the club, and although his goal-scoring instincts that had served him so well at City had dried up, going from 134 goals in 362 games for the Blues to 36 in 335 for United, he continued to impress and dazzle as the tricky and unpredictable winger he always was. It transferred over to international duty as he was part of the squad that won Wales its first ever home championship tournament in 1907, which formed 3 of the 48 caps he won for Wales between 1895 and 1920. It's worth noting, of course, that 48 caps at this time, given the relative dearth of international fixtures compared to nowadays, was a lot for the time. He finally got his hands on that elusive First Division title in 1908, winning another one in 1911 as well as an FA Cup in 1909, becoming one of the figureheads in the first great Manchester United side and, as United's website themselves puts it, the club's first footballing legend. His second sphere of notoriety would actually be influenced by the events that happened to him at Manchester City, which concerned attempting to procure more player rights than what they had at that point. You see, in order to prevent clubs from signing players as soon as they ran out of contract at a certain team, which would give leverage to those who had the financial clout to make those moves happen, basically the Bosman rule nowadays, the FA introduced a transfer and retain system in 1893, another one of their myopic and degrading policies which blighted the organisation for several decades. The system meant that once a player joined a team, they were legally obligated to stay under contract with them at all times if the club wanted to keep them, regardless of whether or not the player wanted to leave, and they would only be able to depart when the club decided that they wanted rid of the player in question. The player could negotiate with another club on his own accord, and the potential selling team could even suspend paying the player's wages until he was moved on. The move was widely criticised, with Meredith, a liberalist throughout his life, calling it, quote, slavery, pure and simple, close quote, and this, twinned with the already mentioned maximum wage policy of £4 a week, which was still double the national average for the time, but still considered not enough by footballers, as well as a lack of financial cover for players in case of a premature ending to their career through injury or their families in case of death, led the players to come together and rise up against these restricted policies. Attempts to form a players' union had fallen through in 1893 and again in 1897, but in 1907, Meredith, as well as his teammate Charlie Turnbull, led proposals to form a trade union, sending out letters to as many of their fellow professionals as they could. And in December, Meredith chaired the first ever meeting of the Association Football Players Union. Within a year, it had superseded 1,300 members, but like always, the Football League and the FA were dismissive of any ideas that would actually progress the game in their own country, let alone allow the players to have a say in their own careers, and convince the players' clubs to withdraw their support for the union. After multiple talks with the FA went unresolved, football's governing bodies ordered the players to either renounce their memberships or face being banned from the sport completely, which did lead to some leaving the AFPU, but for those who didn't, like the entirety of Manchester United's squad, there would be suspensions dished out by either the club or the FA. Outraged, the players, Meredith included, decided to go on strike from playing for their club, training alone, and being dubbed Outcasts FC. Even so, the AFPU was in serious jeopardy, as were the players who were still involved in it, perhaps none more so than Meredith, who'd also seen his sports shop go up in flames in June 1909, an event which destroyed the vast majority of his assets and left him virtually penniless. However, the AFPU then joined with the General Federation of Trade Unions, giving it more weight in potential talks with the authorities, and in August 1909, the FA finally relented and recognised the union, allowing the suspended players to return and introducing a performance-related bonus system, but steadfastly refusing to budge on the retain and transfer and maximum wage policies, as well as denying the rebels their pay, which had been withheld from them by their clubs for the previous couple of months, although the latter decision was later backtracked on. More back and forth between the union and the FA and the Football League followed, including a ban on the PFU badge being worn by their players during games, and disputes over the maximum wage once more, which finally did see some change in the end, although players would only see their maximum pay increase after 2, and then again after 4, years of service with their respective clubs. Meredith still wasn't satisfied, and in 1912 the union formally challenged the retain and transfer policy, although despite paying hefty fees to certain lawyers, their case was defeated and the union was left in debt, having to embarrassingly borrow from the Football League in order to stay afloat. Regardless, it did recover and there was now a formal players' union properly in place, and it has now turned into the Professional Footballers Association, or the PFA for short, with Meredith stating that he was always proud of his work in establishing it. Back to the playing field now, and by the start of the 1910s, the Welshman, by this point in his mid-30s, was no longer an automatic starter for United, and as his powers started to fade and his relationship with the board became more strained, so too did the results on the pitch turn for the worse, as they slipped into mid-table mediocrity in the years leading up to World War I. His popularity among supporters was still unhindered, as for his benefit match in 1912, 39,000 people turned up to watch him in action at United's brand new stadium, Old Trafford. 3 years later though, United were involved in a match-fixing scandal of their own that saw 7 players banned for life, albeit all barring one, as a result of him dying during World War I, were revoked at various stages, but Meredith stayed away from this particular controversy, and during the war, unable to be called up for service owing to his age, he continued to play football in order to keep his fitness up. Upon Organised League football's return in 1919, he would make 35 appearances across 2 seasons, becoming United's oldest ever player for his final game for the Reds in 1921, when he took to the field against Derby County, aged 46 years and 281 days. You might think then that when he left United that summer after falling out with the board once again, his career was done, but that was far from the case, as he moved back across Manchester to rejoin City on a free transfer, making 25 appearances in the First Division and recording a win over United, who would go on to be relegated that season. His final season would be the 1923-24 campaign, in which he made 2 league and 4 cup appearances, scoring in the 3rd round against Brighton, assisting the winner in the 4th round replay against Cardiff, and featuring in the semi-final against Newcastle at the age of 49 years and 245 days, which would eventually prove to be his final game in professional football. Following his retirement, he fulfilled many different roles, including as a coach at Manchester United, a pub landlord, a newspaper columnist, a cinema owner, and a radio and after-dinner speaker. Despite all of those ventures, he lost a lot of money in his later years, and by the time of his death in 1958 at the age of 83, he was virtually impoverished. His death went almost completely unnoticed at the time, perhaps owing to the shock of the Munich air disaster, which had only occurred 2 months prior, still resonating hard, and he was even buried in an unmarked grave, something which was rectified eventually when Manchester City, Manchester United, the PFA and the Welsh FA agreed to contribute to paying for a headstone. However, his contributions to the game wouldn't slip under the radar for too long, and in 2007 he was one of 10 new inductees into the English Football Hall of Fame, alongside esteemed names such as Dennis Bergkamp, Glenn Hoddle and Graham Souness. Perhaps he should have been an inaugural inductee though, as he was a man who transformed the British footballing landscape simply by attempting to give the players more power, liberties and general control over their own careers, which might sound basic now, but, as already outlined, was summarily dismissed by the FA throughout the vast majority of Meredith's playing career. Of course, he was an outstanding footballer in his own right, and he knew it too, quoted as saying that "it would be vanity for me to pretend that I am unaware of the fact that I am a great footballer," close quote. And he played into his late 40s before Sir Stanley Matthews made it cool, but he twinned that with standing up for what he truly believed in, and that is what makes him a legend of football in Britain. But that just about wraps up today's video looking at the original Welsh wizard by the name of Billy Meredith, who transformed the histories of both Manchester City and Manchester United and, realistically, players in Britain as a whole. And if you did enjoy this video, please don't forget to hit the like button because it does show your support for the channel and means the world to me, and subscribe if you haven't done so already, and you can ring the notification bell to get notified whenever I upload a new video straight away. But thank you very much for watching this particular video, and until next time, I'll see you then.